Recording. So Barbara, whenever you're ready.
Okay, well, it says nothing's being shared. So how do
I
I,
just
there we
I
go.
just made you a host. Try it now.
All right. Hold on. Can you see my screen now? All right, so we did the third assignment, which was using the Gapminder website. We chose to compare literacy in males and females in different parts of the world. And so we're going to start with a video on closing the literacy gap.
What is literacy? Literacy is the ability to read, write, listen, speak, and comprehend in order to communicate effectively and successfully in today's world. Why is literacy so important? Literacy helps eradicate poverty. It improves infant mortality rates. It addresses gender inequalities in the workforce, educational setting, and in the economy. And it helps people become members of their communities.
Literacy opens up the ability to have access to limitless numbers of ideas, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing, and the ability to communicate your thoughts and ideas.
How do other countries view literacy?
According to statistics, 1 in 3 adults cannot read in Africa, where more than 170 million adults are illiterate, out of which 47 million are aged 15 to 24.
About 1/3 of the females won't even finish grade school. This is because of the patriarch society that many countries have. Females are expected to take care of their family, household chores, sick relatives, and marry early in some cases.
There's a boy and a girl in a family, it's more likely that the boy will be sent to school and the girl will stay home. Now, 76 million illiterate young women in the world, and in these 76 million women are found in 9 countries alone in the world, and these countries include Nigeria and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Other countries are Burkina Faso, Egypt, Tanzania, Pakistan, India, Ethiopia, Bangladesh. And if you think about it, 5 of these 9 countries are in Africa.
What are some problems with being illiterate? Children in poverty have much lower reading scores. There's academic failure, higher risk of substance abuse, higher risk of teen pregnancy, delinquency issues, unemployment rates are higher, more people are on welfare, a higher rate of malnutrition, more people are unhealthy, and they're not activists in legal and current events. How does literacy affect society? Studies show that educated mothers are more likely to send their children to school than non-educated mothers.
When you educate a girl, it doesn't just stop there. It doesn't stop with the individual. It goes on to the society and the community. So when you educate a girl, you educate the next generation.
Literacy also helps people be good employees. In the United States, most jobs require 2-year college degrees in order for the employees to read and understand regulations, safety warnings, and procedures and be able to communicate those clearly. Literacy also helps families stay healthy. People need to understand doctors' orders, read the medicine bottles, read health pamphlets, and read how to prevent spreads of diseases. Literacy also helps people advocate for themselves. When people are literate, they know how to advocate for themselves. They are aware of their rights. They know how to reduce gender inequalities. They understand how to be owners of property. They understand the healthcare system. They have higher self-esteem and they're able to become more self-sufficient. Being literate also helps people avoid crime. In the US alone, 45% of inmates in jails, 40% in state facilities, and 27% of inmates in federal correction institutions all do not have high school diplomas. 60% of the state and federal inmates can barely read or write. How many people are illiterate? In the US alone, 30 million people over the age of 16 don't read well enough to understand newspapers which are written on an 8th grade reading level, or even know how to fill out a job application. In the United States alone, there are about 30 million people over the age of 16 that read no better than a child in elementary school. Worldwide, 800 million adults are illiterate in their native language, and 2/3 of those are women.
1 in 5 people have either no reading skills or only basic ones. In Africa, the situation is dire. Fewer than 60% of people on the continent are literate.
Let's go back to the original question and ask, why is literacy important? Let's hear directly from some women who can tell their story.
I faked it for years, knowing I can't read well, write well, spell.
It limits me from so many things, just simply life itself.
Without reading, you're not going to get far in life.
Education is like power.
All right, next I'm going to start sharing about the high literacy rates for the youth for females in Sri Lanka and the Philippines. Whenever we were on the Gapminder website and looking at the data, we've noticed that these two countries had a lot of high literacy rates. Here is a graph from the Gapminder website for Sri Lanka, and this is showing from 1981 to 2010, and it's showing the literacy rate for youth females based on the income per person. Next is another graph that shows from 1981 to 2010 in Sri Lanka youth female literacy rates based on children per woman. And the last one is just a graph that shows Sri Lanka from 1981 to 2010 just based on the time. And as you can see, this country started off with a 90% literacy rate in youth females and went pretty close to 100% in 2010. Next, we're going to look at the Philippines, and we're going to look at the same data points. Here's the Philippines from 1980 to 2008 based on income per person. You can see they kind of stay about the same, increase as the years go on. Next, we have youth literacy rates of youth females based on children per woman from 1980 to 2008. And then the last one I did time as well from the Philippines from 1980 to 2008. In the Philippines, as you can see, they stayed above that 90% rate for youth females. So next I'm going to talk about trends and data for both of those countries. Both of those countries stayed above that 90% percentile rate for their youth females. So what are they doing? What did we notice with both of those countries? Both of them, when chosen the indicator of children per woman, there was an increase in the rates as there was a decrease in the number of children. So I thought that was interesting. The less children that they had, the higher or the more increase of those literacy rates. Both countries showed a large growth when looking at the indicator over time. So that's very positive. From the 1980s to 2010, 2008, over time they were growing, even though they already were high above that 90%. And then the last one I looked at for income per person was there was growth among the income. So as the income grew, also the literacy rates for the youth females grew as well. So next I'm going to talk a little bit about the education in the country Sri Lanka. So currently their education system is influenced by their colonial past, which was mandated in 1978. And so all of it has schooling between the ages of 5 and 14, very similar to the United States. At the primary level, all female school attendance is essentially universal, so all females get to attend. While it stands at about 99% of the boys attend. All children attend school free of charge. They get free books. In Sri Lanka, they have to wear uniforms, but they get free uniforms. English is the first language, the student's first language is their country's language. English is a second national language, and then they teach them math. They also learn religion, history, science, and technology, among other specials areas like PE, practical living, technical skills, and then social studies and life studies. Also, for Sri Lanka, all students were assessed through school-based exams and projects. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about the education in the Philippines. The Philippines system was also influenced by their colonial history. Education is offered through formal and non-formal school systems in the Philippines. The number of years is kind of chunked together, and it's one of the shortest school systems in the world. So education goes from 6 years, 4 years, and 4-year structure. The academic school, I thought this was very interesting, starts in June and it ends in March. So it's covering a 40-week period for their school year. And once a student successfully completes up to 6th grade, or 6 grades of their primary school, they're practically awarded a graduation, and they don't have to attend school anymore. So just 6 grades of primary school. And then closing the gender gap, how they closed their gender gap. And they still have low levels of women's economic participations. Women remained in an untapped, educated human resource, but research has shown, especially in these two countries, that whenever you invest in youth women's education, it reduces high fertility rates, it lowers the infant and child mortality rates, and it also lowers maternal mortality, and then it increases women's labor forces and earnings. And so essentially it's investing in the children's education, is investing in the community as well. And that about wraps up the Sri Lanka and the Philippines literacy rates for youth females.
Okay, sorry about that. I was having trouble. So to continue with this conversation, I'm going to show the Gapminder website in action. So we have literacy rate for youth males, 15 to 24 age group. And then we're going to compare that with the literacy rate for youth females. So pay close attention to the dark blue sub-Saharan Africa region. That's the region that I'm going to discuss. You'll notice as I run the Gapminder that they start off as the lowest literacy rate, and then they remain that way throughout the time. So just keep an eye on those dark blue dots. And you'll see as the Gapminder moves, as data starts coming in for the countries, you'll see the bubbles pop up. Again, paying attention to these dark blue ones, which is that sub-Saharan. So I'm going to jump back here to about 2000, where you see most of these bubbles. And you can see as I highlight that very few made it above the 90 percentile up there, while the rest of the country's pretty much caught up and got to that point. So my presentation is again focusing on that sub-Saharan Africa, based on the fact that they were the slowest region to be able to close the gender gap in youth literacy rates. So the major reasons for gender inequality in this area is child labor, where from 1999 to 2006, 10 to 30% of the children ages 5 to 14 were working. They were engaged in labor. Government aid is oftentimes not made it to the destitute areas. And then there's a lot of conflict in that area. So you have displaced home families and families that are living in refugee camps. And then the facilities themselves for education are poor. They don't have qualified educators. Their classrooms are overcrowded. And again, unequal allocation of funds. So we're just going to look at some graphs that I pulled from the Gapminder data. So first, we're going to look at countries that continue to have a male dominance in literacy at a 10% or more rate, even though they have had some closure in gender inequality. And so this is just a series of slides in the order of, you'll see here that Guinea-Bissau they did close the gap by 30%, but they still maintain a 12% literacy gap there between their males and females. And so you can just kind of see as I go through these slides where these countries still sit as far as the gap. Then I've got countries that have increased the gap in gender inequality. Oh, it looks like I am having a problem with the PowerPoint. So let me check on this. Okay, after I switch Gapminder. Okay, let me back up. I'm assuming you could hear my my talk, but not my screen. So let me see what I can do here. So I think I know what I did wrong, so I will not do that in the actual presentation. How is that? Good. Okay. So let me get this going again then. I apologize. Nope, that's not what I wanted to do either, guys. I'm sorry. Hang on. I was sharing not the PowerPoint, but the well, that's not it either. We practiced this. I don't know why I'm having such a hard time. File Explorer. Okay, now I know what I got going on here. Okay, let me back it up so we can. So again, that's the top screen. So the sub-Saharan Africa region, and then this is just the child labor government aid that I discussed. Okay, so these are the countries that have maintained a male dominance in their literacy at 10% or more. But I'm also going to point out the closure. So you can see here, Guinea-Bissau closed their gender gap by 30%, but they still have a 12% gap there. So they have seen some significant increase in their female literacy rates, while their male have climbed a little bit, but slower. So they still have a little bit of a gap there. So each of these graphs is going to have your closure here and then the current gap in 2011, or the latest year it was reported. And I'll just go through these slides a little bit. I have them ranked in order of closure and then highlighted their current states. So you see there was an increase in all of those. Then we have countries that have increased the gap instead of closing it. So here you'll see Ethiopia here in the top, where they started with an 11% gap in 94. And then you'll see in about 2004, that gap increased to 24% as the male literacy rate grew, but the female literacy rate did not as fast. And then you'll see that there was kind of a dip in both, and then both start going back up, but it's slower to catch up. So they're at a 16%. The Congo Democratic Republic, both the male pretty much stayed steady, but the female declined, leaving it with a 26% gap. And then Mali, which again, started low with a 13%, but they've increased that gap to 17. So these three countries are extremely rural areas, and they're among the hardest reach female population for all categories, not just literacy, but also health, wealth, and education. Excuse me. And then I'm going to show you countries that have narrowed that male dominant gender gap to less than 10%. So you can see Malawi started with 21% and ended at 4%. And you can just kind of see those gaps there. Again, narrowed gaps. Then I have countries that have a narrow gender gap, but they experienced a slight decrease in literacy. So they've kind of been pretty steady, 5% gap closure, but they didn't start with a lot. So the next slide I have here, which I found interesting, was Liberia. And Liberia closed the gap. So you can see here, they started with a 29% gap in 84, and the female population climbed pretty steady and even surpassed the males. But then in 2004, we see a dramatic decrease over the next couple of years in female literacy rates, almost back to where they started. And so in my research, what I found was that that 2004 timeframe was the end of the Second Liberian Civil War. And due to that, there was economic effects, there was deaths, disease, and then just family displacements, having to move around because of the loss of the men in the family. So a lot of that responsibility was placed on the women of all ages, including the very young female population as well. Whether it was staying home to take care of siblings, or while the mother went to try to find work or whatever. The next one is the countries that have actually closed the gender gap. So you'll see these three countries that started not with a huge gender gap, but you can see that they did eventually close those, and the male-female literacy rates are equal. Then there was a reverse in the gender gap dominance. So you can see these countries started with a male gender dominance, and then you can see the 0% here in 1999, where that gender gap completely closed, and then the female population took off. Not so much as fast here in Zimbabwe as it did in Cape Verde, but and they're not major differences, but I thought it was interesting. Countries that have maintained a high literacy rate with a 3% or less gender gap. So you have Swaziland. So you can see down here, they start in the 75 percentile and then reach almost there in the 95-ish. South Africa started at 85%. And again, very little gap there. Say Chile's started with 97% in their males, 98.5% for their female. Mauritius starts at 90, a little over 90%. Gabon at 92, almost 95% with their male. And Equatorial Guinea, they're way up here at the 96.5 and above. Then I want to show you countries with a dominant female gender gap. So you can see some a little more than others. Botswana, 6.4% gap, which has been reduced where the males have kind of caught up to 3.5. Lesotho, 12.7 with an actual increase. So the male literacy, you can see here, decreased. And the female literacy did as well, but not as fast. So we ended up with a 17.9% gap. And then Nambia, I thought was interesting. You see a 4.7% gap, reduced it to 2, and then increased again, this time to 7.4%. So I thought that was interesting. Kenya has seen a steady decline in literacy rates, both male and female, while Zambia has seen a very small gender gap, which increased to a very large male-dominant gap. Some attempts to close the gap, your technological revolution, but it didn't quite work. And why it didn't work is because it's costly. The technology is costly, and women or female gender have very low purchasing power. The level of education needed to understand and use the technology, the women or the female population just don't have that level of education. And then there's a cultural mindset that women don't need to understand the technology or don't need the education. And so one thing that some of the technology companies are doing, Intel in particular, is they have a campaign called She Will Connect. And they're trying to raise those technological literacy rates in the female population in that region. Another thing is just building schools or classrooms is not enough. So the architecture isn't a fix because the electricity is scarce, and the equipping and maintaining the equipment is very difficult. So those are some things that they've tried to do, but haven't been real successful. And then this last slide I got from the World Bank. And these are projects that are going on in the sub-Saharan African region. You can see up here in the upper right, this pie graph here, that there's been several projects that have started and closed, and then there's a few that are active now, but there's just not a lot of work going on. And then when you compare it to where that work is being placed, over here on the left-hand side, you can see that the majority of this pie graph is the central government administration, where these projects are being pushed. So when we look at primary education here, we're just looking at such a small piece of the puzzle. Now, like it's been said earlier in the video and then in Kim's presentation, as you take care of health issues or you take care of mortality rates, you can see some increase. So this, where the money is going, I'm not saying is a bad thing. I'm just saying that education is not the focus that we would want it to be. This is the health one, and I believe health plays a big part in your literacy. So these are the references to the information in my slide. So I really enjoyed doing the project. I'm going to let me unmute them so that they can participate. Stop sharing and turn there. Kim, are you unmuted?
I am.
Okay.
Great job.
Barbara, I'm trying to get you unmuted. Sorry. Self. Okay. So I enjoyed doing the project. I learned a lot. And I hope you guys did too. Again, the references on my slide can take you to some more information. Kim or Barbara, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
No, that about wraps it up, I think.
Yep. All right. So I hope you guys enjoyed the presentation. And if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer those at this time.